Awesome. I believe we are recording now. Yep. So hello, everyone. Just a reminder of these rules. Feel free to ask questions. Always, always. Okay. And so some announcements. There will be no class next week. That's June 13th and June 15th, I believe. That should be whatever Tuesday, Thursday is. There will be no class next week. I will be out of town, unavailable, no class. So don't come to class next week because you will be all alone. So yes, I wanted to say that. I also wanted to say, just as a warning, there are planes outside where I am. They are practicing for an air show and making very loud noises. So hopefully you won't be able to hear those through my microphone, but I just wanted to put out a warning that if you hear like a loud rumbling sound, that's these planes outside my house. It's been going on all day. It's very annoying. And I'll mute if it gets to be like too loud, but it shouldn't. But I wanted to warn you just in case because it's bothering me. Okay, so for today's class, you'll need Replit. You'll need Replit most class, but I like to put that link there so that people can easily access it. So go ahead and get logged in. And first, I want to start out with on Tuesday, towards the end of class, we got to this assignment here from when we covered operations. And so write Python code that initializes two variables, num1 and num2, assign the values to be any float or int that you would like, and then print out the following. So we're going to do that together real quick. I'll show you how I would do this. I'm going to create a REPL Python, and I'm going to call it operations assignment. And let's go ahead and create that. Okay. So let's see, initializes two variables, num1 and num2. I'm going to say num1 equals 0.55, num2 equals 10. You can make your numbers equal to whatever you want. This is just what I set mine to. And let's see, we need to print the sum of the numbers. So that is print. And I'm going to say num1 plus num2. All right, now we want to print the difference of the numbers, which is just a fancy way of saying num1 minus num2. Next thing we want to print is the product of the numbers, num1 times num2. And then, print the first number divided by the second number, num1 divided by num2. And then there were some bonuses where it said, if you want to keep going, you can print out num1 modulo num2. So someone remind me, put in the chat, someone remind me, what symbol do I use for modulo? How would I type out num1 modulo num2? Yes, amazing. Thank you so much. Yes, it is that percent sign. So we're going to say num1 percent sign, which means modulo num2. And that is what is the remainder when you divide num1 by num2. And then that last one, what will I type for this last one? Num1 raised to the power of num2. What would that be? Yes. Amazing. Yes, star. So num1 to the power of num2. Okay, so this is what my code looks like. Not too bad, just a lot of print statements. And if we run that, then here we go. We've got 10.55, negative 9.45, and it just prints out all of these answers to what we did. So if I want to, maybe make that a bit easier to read, let's just make this 10 and this 2, 10 and 2, just so that we can do that math in our head a bit easier to check that Python is doing correct math. So here we go, 10 plus 2 is 12, yep. 10 minus 2 is 8, 10 times 2 is 20. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Notice Python did 5.0. It makes it a float when we use division. 10 mod 2 is 0. That's because 10 is perfectly divisible by 2, so there's no remainder. So 10 mod 2 is 0, and then 10 squared is 100. So great. Does anyone have questions about this code before we move on to new stuff today? Any questions? All right, it looks like we're all good. Of course, you can raise your hand or put a question in the chat if you need to. So let's go back to the slideshow. And let's see, yep. Okay, so, my screen is, okay, there we go. All right, so int and float operations. Just as a review, we talked about these different mathematical operations that you could use with numbers or integers and floats. So we've got, addition, subtraction, multiplication, all of those. And you guys are doing really great with those. We also talked about string operations. And so you can't really combine strings with numbers. You need to combine strings with strings in operations. But you can do something called concatenation with strings, which is where you add them. So you use the plus sign, and you can say string plus another string, and that'll basically squish them together. And remember, this includes numbers that are in quotes. Those become a string. Symbols that are in quotes become strings. And then we also learned about like if you add a space, that's also considered part of your string, that space. So if you say hello space world, that is considered different than just hello plus world. So just some different things that we did with string operations there. So one thing that I did want to talk about was we talked about what types of variables we have. So we might have int, float, string, or Boolean, and different operations, just like we talked about with when you divide two integers or two floats, the result will be a float or a decimal. But we can also check the type by using this type. It's called typecasting or typecasting. And so this allows you to convert one variable type to another. So let's say that you have 3.0, and that's a float, but you want it to be an integer. You can use typecasting to turn it into an integer. And how we do this is basically just using the Python name for these types. So like I said, when I am abbreviating them by saying int, float, str for string, bool for Boolean, that's because those are the actual keywords that Python recognizes. So to do this, you just say the name of the type that you want it to be, and then in parentheses, inside the parentheses is what it's going to transform to that type. So if we say x equals int, parentheses, 4.9, close your parentheses, it will turn x into 4. So x will be 4. And this is just taking off that decimal. So you could say x equals int 5.11111, and x would be equal to 5. Same with strings. You can say x equals string 3.2 inside those parentheses, and that will actually just put quotes around it and make x equal to the string quote 3.2. So that's a string now, not a float. Let's say we want to make an integer from a string. You can say x equals int, and then in quotes 5. This one only works converting strings to integers when your string is a number in quotes. You can't convert a word to an integer because that doesn't really make sense. But if you have a number in quotes for whatever reason, you can convert that to an integer or a float. And then likewise, we can take an integer, we can say x equals float, and then inside that parentheses put an integer like 1, and it will make x equal to 1.0. And then if we are unsure about what the type of a variable is, maybe we did some operation and we lost track of if it's ended up being a float or an int, you can always check the type of a variable with the type function. And so how you would do that is you could ask Python, you would use a print statement, and you can say print type x. Notice how all of my parentheses here line up, because both print needs everything to be in parentheses, and then type needs its argument. We call it an argument when it goes inside the parentheses. Type needs that to be in parentheses as well. So this is just a bit on, it's called typecasting when you change the type, and you can use the type function to check a type. So let's do that. Let's play around with that here. So I'm going to say x equals 5. I'm just going to type out some variables here. Y equals 9.004 and z equals the string hello. Oops. And oops. Let's see. Let's add a w here. W equals the string 5. So let's check what types these are. So if I say print, and then what do I want to print? I want to print what is the type of W. So if I run this, it should print type of W up here. And you can see it prints it like this. It says class str, and that is Python's way of saying that is a string. So similarly, if we want to check the type of X, let's run that. And that is class int or integer. And we could do that for all of these. Let's check Y. Indeed, Y is a float. And Z, of course, is a string. So that's how we can check the type of something, is by printing type. And this is mostly useful if you need a specific type for a specific operation and you want to check for yourself what that is. So let's see what happens if we say new integer equals, let's try creating an integer from this float here. So we call our typecast, so we want it to be type integer. I'm going to say int, and then inside that I'm going to put y. So right now y is 9.0004. If I want to make it into an integer, I say int y, and now let's see if it did it. Let's print type new integer. So I want to make sure that this typecasting works, and I'm going to print the type of this new integer that we just created. So let's run that, and it did. It made it an integer for us. Let's see what that looks like too. So why don't we just print new integer? And when we print new integer, we see that it's now equal to 9, and it is the class integer, and there's no 0.004 on that. So how about, let's try new string. Let's make something a string. So I'm going to say new string equals string X. I want to turn X into a string instead of an int. Let's print that new string to make sure that it did that for us. And then we're going to print the type of new string and make sure that it did change that type. So if we run this, now we have turned it into a string, and the quotes won't necessarily be there when it prints it out, but we did get confirmation that it did turn new string into a string. And then let's see, let's try to turn W into a float. We haven't done float yet, so new float equals, so what would I do if I want to turn W into a float? Go ahead and type in the chat. What should I do if I want to turn W, if I say I want new float to be the float version of W, or W typecasted to a float? Go ahead and put in the chat what I would type here if I want W to be a float and assign it to my new float. Yay, thank you so much for all of your answers. All right, I'll give you 3, 2, 1. Yes, thank you, everyone. So yes, it seems like we came to an agreement. We would say float and then W. So let's check. We'll print that float. Oops, print new float. That's what we named it. New underscore float. And then we'll print type of new underscore float. And let's see. There we go. So it turned quote 5 to 5.0, and it confirms for us that this is indeed the float data type. So pretty neat. We will get into using this a little bit over the summer. So are there any questions about types or typecasting so far? And yes, just to be clear, when we do something like this, okay, when we do something like this, it's not rounding like we think. So if we have, you know, new int equals int y, and then let's print new int, this is not going to round like we think of it, where it rounds to the nearest whole number. It's just going to chop off the decimal and just give you the whole number of it. So 9.9 is just 9 when it becomes an int. Good questions. Okay, great. Yes, Brandon.
I had a question about the concatenation. Can you also use that to remove similar items from strings? Using, for instance, instead of adding them, subtracting them?
Yeah, so I don't see this, but let's just see. A equals hello. B equals hello again. Right. So if we print A plus B, it'll concatenate. And then what happens when you say print A minus B? Error. Yeah, it doesn't like that. So it says unsupported operand type for the minus sign. It says string and string. So you can usually read these errors and see what's going on. But yeah, it will give you an error if you try to subtract them. We will learn some fancy string methods later in the summer for how we can manipulate strings like that, though. So I love that kind of thinking. You can't do it with the minus sign, but there are some fancy methods with strings where you can remove things from strings. But yeah, great question.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? Awesome, awesome. All right. So now we've done typecasting. Okay, so the other type of operations that we have, or maybe not, you know, mathematical operations where we think about where we get, like, you know, a number. We can also do operations with Booleans. And so these are called comparison operators because we are comparing two objects. So these allow you to compare two different variables. If the statement is true, it evaluates to true. And if the statement is false, it evaluates to false. And remember, these are our Booleans, which Python just recognizes as true with a capital T and false with a capital F. And just to note here, you can only compare ints and floats and then strings to strings. So numbers, keeping numbers together and keeping strings together, just like we did with our operations before. So here are the operations that you will be seeing. So first of all, this equals equals means that something is equal to or is exactly. And why we put two equal signs is because we already use one equal sign to assign variables. So it doesn't make sense if we just use the one equal sign, because Python already knows that symbol and it says, oh, that means I'm assigning a variable. But if we put two equal signs, we're asking Python, is this equal to that? So whenever I see this in my head, I always say equal equal so that I don't get confused with assigning a variable. So this symbol, two equal sign, one after the other, means is equal to. So in this case, 5 equal 5. This statement would evaluate to true because 5 does equal 5. Now let's try exclamation mark. So in Python, exclamation mark means not. And so just in operations. So don't try that everywhere, but this exclamation mark in this case stands for not. So this means not equal to. So is not equal to exclamation mark equal. And you may have seen this if you've taken a logic class before. A lot of times they'll use a squiggle for not, or they'll use an exclamation mark. That's kind of where it comes from. So this means is not equal to, so it says 1 is not equal to 5. And that would evaluate to true here because 1 is not equal to 5. And then some ones that you're probably familiar with from math class, we have less than and greater than. These are just those little angle bracket things there. And so less than, it'll evaluate to true. If the number on the left is less than the number on the right, so 3 less than 7, that would evaluate to true. Greater than, kind of similar, so 2 greater than -1 would be true. And then, when you write out less than equal to, you kind of write it out with like, you do the bracket, you do the angle bracket, and then you underscore it with a line. It's not really easy to do that when you're typing though. So what we do is we have less than, and then actually just the equal sign. The same with greater than or equal to. So less than or equal to means that if the number on the left is equal to the symbol on the right or less than the symbol on the right, this will evaluate to true. And then the opposite for greater than or equal to. 8 is greater than or equal to 4. That evaluates to true. Okay, and yeah, so a bunch of people have different ways for remembering which one is less than and or greater than. It's just something that you gotta know for Python. So let's see. So we can compare numbers. And that kind of makes sense. We can compare numbers like, 5 is greater than 4. That makes sense. But then what about strings? How could we compare strings and why would we even want to do this? Well, let's see. So this says A is less than B. That is true. Capital A is less than lowercase a. What is going on here? So when we use the less than or equal to, less than or greater than signs in strings, we're asking about alphabetical order. So Python associates with each string, kind of an order. And so it says A is less than B because A comes before B. Capital letters are typically less than lowercase letters. And then we can also assert that 2 strings are the exact same. So if you have assigned 2 strings somewhere, you want to make sure they're the same. Say equal equal. So this capital H hello does equal capital H hello on this other side. ABC is greater than DEF. That one, okay, for a minute I was like, wait, but that's wrong. And yeah, so if you put something that is false, it will evaluate to false. And don't worry if this doesn't make sense right now. I'll show you some examples of this so that you see like what do I mean when I'm saying it evaluates to true and false. So some applications of this, like I said, are if you want to put things in alphabetical order, then you can check, the greater than or if something is greater than or less than another word. It's a little weird to think about. It just kind of takes some practice. But another one that happens a lot is checking if a string exactly matches another one. So that's kind of like if you have a password and someone needs to say a password, you want to check that the password they input is the exact same password that you have saved somewhere. So let's look at this real quick. Yeah, and that's a great, someone put in the chat, I love this. It's similar to the alphabetical order that a file system sorts files by. So yeah. I really like that comparison right there. So let's just try out some of these comparison operators. So I'm going to say A equals 1, B equals 10.5. I'm just picking random numbers. And now I want to see what it's going to output. So remember, if we want output, we need to use the print statement. Sorry, my cat is over there attacking the door because he wants to say hi to everyone, but I'm ignoring him. So let's see what happens if we print A is less than B. So go ahead and think about what you think this is going to print. Feel free to type it in the chat as well. Yes, my cat's name is SoundCloud. Well, one of my cat's name is SoundCloud. Everyone wants the cat. Okay, let me see. All right, think about what's going to happen when you print A is less than B. Let's see what happens when you print B is less than A. And then print A equal B. Think about that in your head and put it in the chat. And maybe my cat will be outside and I'll reward you. All right, how are y'all doing? Here's SoundCloud. Good job working hard, everyone. SoundCloud says hello.
That's a
It
nice
actually
cat
wasn't.
you have.
Thank you. It actually, that wasn't him at the door. It was my other cat, but he's very shy and he doesn't like to be picked up. So anyway.
Well, you named him after radio?
Yeah, kind of. His name was Cloud at the shelter.
At the
and
shelter?
then,
After Cloud Strife?
no, I think they just named him Cloud because he looks like a cloud. Anyway, we could talk about my cat after the class,
You named
but
him after the musical
Yeah, got-
streaming service.
yeah,
That's a
kind of
nice name.
You know what breed he is?
He's a Siamese.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I love the enthusiasm for my cat. Thank you, everyone. So hopefully
Welcome.
you had time to think about this. That was kind of fun. All right, back to coding though. So if you
Humans
said
are
true,
vulnerable to cute cats.
yeah, very much. So hopefully you were able to think about this. So we print A is less than B, that'll be true. Print B is less than A, that'll print false. And then print A equal B, that'll print false. Let's see what happens if we print A is not equal to B, exclamation mark equal. And that's true because A is not equal to B. So yeah, just some of the little operators in use there. And now if we want to look at the strings, so I'll just show you this one where we're talking about alphabetical order. Let's have, okay, let's say A equals the string A, B equals the string B. That could get confusing though. I'm gonna say string 1 and string 2, so we're not confused by the variable names. And now let's say print string 1 is less than string 2. And it'll print true. So this is just, you can kind of think of like the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, like gaining value as you go farther into the alphabet. And so A has the smallest value and Z has the largest. And now if we want to compare lowercase a with capital A, let's see. So is lowercase a less than capital A? That is false. So it actually, Python starts the alphabet with capital letters, which have the smallest value, which doesn't make sense because they're big letters. So let's see, string 1 is greater than string 2. Little a has a greater value than capital A. A little bit weird. You won't encounter it a lot unless you happen to be writing code that puts everything in alphabetical order and also cares about capitalization. So just something interesting to note. All right, so let's see. We did our comparisons. So do we have any questions about comparisons before we move on? It's kind of straightforward. You just have to, and you can always check yourselves, right? So if you're unsure about something, use a print statement, print it out, put it in ChatGPT and say, explain this to me, I don't understand. So,
No question.
all right, good. Okay, so back to the slideshow. So we did those string comparisons. So now let's talk about some keywords. So we know by now Python recognizes some words and it recognizes those as keywords or something that it needs to do. So the print statement is one of those. But we also have and or. And so these are no quotes, they're not strings, they're just literally you type and then or you type or. And so these are also for comparisons. So just like we were using, greater than and less than, equal, those are comparing two things. And or are also comparing two things. They're just represented by a word because we have a really easy short word for them that Python can recognize. So when we use the and statement, it's saying a condition on the left and a condition on the right. So this is going to be something like you have your conditions that we were looking at here. So like 5 is greater than 1 on the left, and 6 is greater than 4 on the right. And this will, if you print it, it will print out true or evaluate to true only if both of these conditions, the left and the right, are true. So that's like if someone is asking you, do you want a sandwich and chips? If you want a sandwich and you want chips, you're going to say yes. But if you only want a sandwich and no chips, you're going to say no, I only want one of those. So that whole thing is false. So this only evaluates true if both conditions are true, and it evaluates to false if any condition, either the left or the right, is false, because we need both of them to be true, 1 and 2. So next we have or, and these are also kind of similar to like if you've ever done circuits before, it's kind of the same logic, except we just have and or. So now we have or, so condition or condition. This will evaluate to true if any condition is true. So if someone says, yes or no, you want either a sandwich or chips, then that's true if you just want chips. That's true if you want a sandwich, and that's true if you want a sandwich and chips, both of them. So if either one of these is true, this or will evaluate to true. But if both of them are false, not one of them, if both of them are false, so if you don't want a sandwich, you don't want chips, you don't want anything, it's false. Condition on the left is false, condition on the right is false, neither one is true. So that evaluates to false. That was a lot of me saying true and false in the same sentence there. So let's practice it. So what about this expression? I'm going to give you an expression and then you tell me what it will evaluate to, either true or false. So for this one, 5 is greater than 1 and 5 is less than 10. What will that evaluate to? Go ahead and put in the chat. What if we say print this, will that print true or false? 5 is greater than 1 and 5 is less than 10. Put it in the chat. Thank you everyone for your answers. I love it. I'll give you 3 more seconds. 2, 1. Awesome. Yes, it's true. So this will evaluate to true because both of these conditions are true. All right, slides, keep going. Okay, so what about this one? Oh, wait, that didn't make sense. I forgot. This is supposed to be 10 mod 2 equals 0 or 4 is less than 1. So that is supposed to be 10 mod 2 equals 0 on the left. And then on the right, it's 4 is less than 1. So will that evaluate to true or false? Yeah, everyone gets a gold star. Okay, so will this one evaluate to true or false? And I'll change that in the slides after the class, but that's supposed to be 10 mod 2 equals 0 or 4 is less than 1. Yes, thank you so much, everyone. So that is true. And now the last one, 10 is equal to 5 or 7.0 is less than 7.15. What will this evaluate to? 10 equal to 5 or 7.0 is less than 7.15. Awesome. Thank you for your answers. And yes, that one is going to be, whoops, accidentally changed it. So that would be true. But then if you notice, I accidentally changed it in the last one and made it and, which made it false. Couple typos in this chart, I apologize. So if this was an and statement, one of these is false, that one is false, 10 is not equal to 5. And so since both of these are not true, then the whole thing goes to false. But if we were just looking at this one where it's an or statement, then that one is true. So big apologies for all of those typos just now.
Miranda suspicious.
Yeah. Whoops. Yeah, so it said plot twist. Yep. Just kidding. I changed the question. All right. Good job, everyone. It seems like you really get that. So why are we talking about all of these true, false, true? What does that even mean? Well, we can use these to make decisions on what code to run in our code. So what I mean by this, that wasn't a great explanation. But what I mean by this is, all right, please stay muted. Oh, whoops, my Zoom thing did something weird. Okay. So we can have conditional statements. So Python will run code line by line, as we talked about. But what if we only want a part of the code to only run given some condition? So this is where our conditional statements come in. So this is code that will only run if a condition is true. So just like we were practicing earlier with true, false, the code will only run if a condition is true in these conditional statements. And how you test if a condition is true is you use these comparison operators. So like equal, less than, greater than, stuff like that. And these are called if statements. So this is how we will type that out in Python. You say if, and you put your condition. You don't need parentheses, but you can have them. It's optional. And then you press enter tab. So I mentioned earlier, Python recognizes tabs as part of code. And it's very important when you have an if statement, you're saying, if this condition, then run this code. And how you tell Python the code to run if the condition is true is you indent. And so your code needs to be indented, the part that you want to run if the condition is true. And then if you keep going here, when you unindent, that means that code is outside of the if statement and it's going to run like normal. So indent the code inside of the if statement. And you may see these little hashtag or sharp symbols or pound symbols, whatever you call them. Those are called comments. And those are just code. It's just you put if you put that symbol in front of something, Python doesn't run it like it's code. It's kind of a way for you to be able to talk about your code or explain your code. It just doesn't run. So that's why we have these hashtags here. So let's go ahead and look at this example. So we have some code. We have x equals 1, y equals 1. And now we say if x equal y, tab print x is equal to y. So when we run this, it will perform an evaluation of this phrase right here, x equal y. Let's see, x is equal to 1, y is equal to 1. So that's true. And if true, then print this. So it will print that because our condition evaluated to true. So let's try this out. So we have this one, if. So x is equal to 11. If x is greater than 10, print x is greater than 10. So what will this do? Will that print or will it not? Go ahead and put in the chat, will it print or not? Yeah, thank you everyone. So yes, so it will print. So I'm just gonna grab this and paste it in here into Replit. And so I have x equals 11 if x is greater than 10. And so we have this tab here to tell it that this is the code that we want it to execute if the if statement is true. Then print x is greater than 10. Oh, I think it messed up this. Sometimes when you paste into Replit, it gets confused by quotes. So you may have to do it over again. So I'm just going to type that again. X is greater than 10. So now if I run this, it's going to print x is greater than 10. So now let's switch this. Let's say if x is less than 10. Now what will happen? If we run this code, what will happen? Go ahead and put in the chat. What do you think will happen if I run this code? Oops. Yeah, so thank you, everyone. So exactly. So if I run this, nothing happens. It doesn't have an error because it's okay that this is false. It just says, oh, okay, I'm going to skip this line, go to the next line, and there's nothing there. So if we wanted, we could put more code down here. Right now, there's no other code besides the if statement, and then the code inside. We call it inside the if statement when it's indented like that. So let's say I want to say print x. So now what will happen if I run this code? Yeah, great job. So yeah, now it'll print the value of x, which is 11. And it didn't, it just completely ignored this because this statement was false. So let's make x a different value now. Let's say x is equal to negative 2.6. So now if I run this code, what will happen? What will it print? Negative 2.6. Yep. But this if statement is now true. So it's going to print that statement right here. So it's not going to print just negative 2.6. Remember, we're evaluating this statement. And now we have x equals negative 2.6. We evaluate the statement. If x is less than 10, negative 2.6 is less than 10. That is true. And now it's going to print x is greater than 10, which is funny because I forgot to update the string. But Python isn't looking at what this wording says. Python is just looking at this conditional statement. So just for clarity, so you know, x is less than 10, but it printed whatever I put there. It doesn't matter what I said. All right, so x is less than 10. Great job. Yeah, so now we've got our if statements, and then I kind of messed around. So these are just some more examples. So what about this one when we have a lot of if statements? So if I say after this, I put if x mod 2 equals 0, then print something else. So I have that if statement, and then I have if x mod 2 equals 0, print x is even. So that's just a reminder. When you do modulo 2, you're saying what's the remainder when you divide something by 2? And that is equal to 0 because there's no remainder if it's divisible by 2, which means it's an even number. So this is a quick way for checking if a number is even. So now if I run this code, then it only prints this one because this one evaluated to true and this evaluated to false because x is not an even number. Let's change x to an even number and see what happens. So let's make x 20. Now what's going to run? Go ahead and put in the chat when I run this, what is it going to print? I'm seeing some leading questions here in the chat. All right, yep. So now it's only going to print x is even. Great job. So it's not, x is not less than 10. It's going to evaluate this 20 less than 10. That's false. We're going to skip this line. Go to the next one. Now we have another if statement. Is x mod 2 equal to 0? Yes. So we're going to print this here. And so you could put whatever you want inside of these print statements, as long as, inside of these if statements, as long as they're still indented, Python will recognize it as inside the if statement. So we could even do something like make a new variable called like y equals x plus 1. And now we print y. So something like that. If we run this, oops, what did I do? Indentation, unindent doesn't match. Okay, so Python, like I said, is really particular about how you indent. And sometimes if you copy and paste from a file, it doesn't indent the same, even though it looks the same. So if you get an indentation error, just try unindenting and re-indenting. So let's make it so that this runs. So what number could I set this to? Let's set it to 1 if I want this block of code to run here. So x is equal to 1. Now it prints x is less than 10. And then it's going to do this code that I gave it. And now it's going to print y because x is less than 10. So this whole thing is true. So now what if I tried to print y outside of that if statement? Let's think about, what do we think will happen if I try to print y, but I'm outside, I'm not indented? It's kind of a trick question because it depends. If this if statement runs, if this is true, then the code will run and it will initiate y. So if I do this, it's able to print y because we defined it up here. But if we make x 11, so it's not, so this is going to be false. All of this code will not run. Python will just ignore this. It doesn't even know what's there because it just ignores it. It skips it because the if statement evaluated to false. If we just go print y, Python's going to say, what the heck is y? It says name y not defined. This is what happens when you don't define a variable. So print y, we haven't defined it because even though we think we have, Python just ignored all of this because that if statement evaluated to false. So a little tricky there. All right, and I see, looks like we're eager to do if, elif, and else statements. So, oh, I did see a question though. Can we nest? Okay, yes. Brandon got that, thank you. You can nest if statements, and we will practice that as well, where you have if this, and then you have another if statement inside of it. So let's go to elif. So elif stands for else if, and this is checking if another condition after the first if statement, it has to be after an if statement, and it will only evaluate if the first if condition is false. So what the heck did I just say? So you say, so we started x equals 11. If x is greater than 10, print x is greater than 10. Elif x is less than 5, print x is less than 5. So if we run this, it would just print x is greater than 10. But if we made x equal to something like 1, now this is going to be false because it's not greater than 10. This one, however, it's going to move on. It's going to say, okay, let's check the next condition. X is less than 5. That's true. Now it's going to print x is less than 5. So that's how you can check multiple conditions based on the first one. So this elif is only going to evaluate if the first condition up here is false. So if elif, and then our next one is else. Else is what you have at the very end of your statements, your if statements. And this will only run if both the if statement and the elif statement are false. So this, you don't put a condition in front of it because it's going to run no matter, it's going to run if the other ones are false. So it's just basically, it goes through every option until it gets to that one. If all the other ones before it were false, it'll run that. So let's practice this a bit. Let's practice. So let's see, I'm going to have something like, so if x is less than 10, we're going to print x is less than 10. Actually, I'm going to have it print hooray. And I'm doing this because I don't want you to think that it's looking at what the string says. So now I'm going to say elif, and this needs to be unindented. Elif x is greater than 10, colon. So this colon here is important. I forgot to mention that it has a colon, but you do need that. It's kind of like if you're about to give someone instructions, you say your instructions are colon, then the instructions. Don't forget this colon here. So now I'm going to say elif x is greater than 10, print woohoo. And now the else statement, we just do else colon, you need the colon, enter, and Replit will automatically indent for you if it sees you have something here that needs indentation. And then else, print congrats. So just looking at this, when will we print congrats? What does x have to be equal to for our code to print congrats? Yeah, exactly. X needs to be 10 because we have if x is less than 10, if x is greater than 10, and these will evaluate false if x is equal to 10. So then this will run. So let's go ahead and run this and go ahead and think about what you think will print. What do you think will print when I run this if x is equal to 11? It prints woohoo because x, so it goes, how it's Python does this is we go x is equal to 11. Okay, next line. Nothing on this next line. Okay, next line. If x is less than 10, colon, it'll evaluate this. And it says, is 11 less than 10? It says false. Ignore the next line. then it goes to this elif statement and it says elif x is greater than 10. Now that's true. So we're going to print woohoo. And then it just ignores this else statement because it doesn't matter. It got through its list. It got its true statement. It's done. Let's see. Let's say we want elif. Let's say if x is less than 0, and then let's say elif x is greater than 10. You can add more elifs to check for more conditions, as many as you want. So if elif, as many elifs as you want, and then an else is how you end it. It's kind of like a sandwich. Okay, now let's say elif x equal 5. Print, oops, this indented too many times. So that would have given me an error because I accidentally pressed tab again. So make sure you're all lined up with your tabs. Now elif x equal 5, print yay. Okay, so now let's set x to be -1. So what will print if we set x to -1? Yes, I've got some votes for hooray. Let's see. And indeed, it is. It is hooray. Good job. So hopefully you're getting the hang of all of these. It takes a little bit to think about them, but it's really useful if you are able to look at code and then think about what it does. And remember here that if statements aren't quite working, you can look over it and look over it. Maybe you're still not getting it. You can ask ChatGPT. You can put in the code and say, why doesn't this do what I expect it to do? Why doesn't it print yay? And then ChatGPT can kind of explain it to you. Just an example of using ChatGPT as, your kind of personal helper. So now let's make x equal to 5. And hopefully it'll print 5 because it'll go here. Is x less than 0? Nope. Is x greater than 10? Nope. Is x equal to 5? Yes. And now it prints yay. So that is just quick examples of how we can use what's called conditional statements. Yes, Brandon.
Can you combine strings in the same if-else statements with integers or floating point?
Right. So you can't do comparison if you mean
Well, for instance, if you wanted to have something where the input could be either somebody typing in a number or typing in a word to essentially segregate what your output would be.
So yes, there are ways to do this. What I'm hearing is, can you say something like print x is greater than y? Is that what you're asking or no?
Essentially using it as
to check if it's what type it
yeah.
is. Okay, yeah. So if you want to check the type of something, you could say something, because remember how we used that type thing. And so sorry, I'm trying to think about this.
Well, I'm just thinking if you have, let's say you're programming for a text field where somebody could be typing in a number or typing in words as a way of filtering out to essentially send them to different parts of your program depending on what they're inputting.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
So if you're thinking about printing out text, if the input is a number or a float, I think depending on the input function you use, the type will always come out as a string. Even if you type in the number 5, for example, that inputted value will be a string type.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Brendan.
I know, there's 2 different functions for inputs. I don't know if this was updated in later versions of Python, but there's input and then there's raw input. raw input always outputs strings. Inputs will detect if it's a float or an integer, and then it will make it that type.
So I think input is always a string. I've always had to
Again,
convert
yes,
it.
please correct me on this, Randa.
No, yeah, like I think it's always a string. I think when someone enters something into the console, it is always a string, unless that has changed in the last little bit. But yeah, so just quickly, Brandon, and thank you, Brendan, for helping me with that. Usually when you get input from a user, it will be converted to a string, even if they enter a number, because that's just how Python takes in input. But we can go over ways to check, like, if you're able to turn that into an int or not. But that is a very forward-thinking question that I do appreciate.
All right, thank you.
We just haven't learned the, we haven't learned
Yeah, sorry for
quite
jumping
that
in.
far yet. No, it's okay. I'm really glad that you asked. Okay, so that is pretty much everything that we wanted to get through today. And I'm going to go ahead and put up, I have 2 assignments because I won't be here next week. And then an extra, if you want to do some extra exercises, you are welcome. There are some on this website. This is just for those who are like, oh man, I'm really bummed we don't have class. I want more Python to work on. So this first assignment is to write Python code that goes through each number less than 10 manually. You just go through each number less than 10 and print if the number is divisible by 4 or not. And then I have a little bonus thing here. Yes, Felix.
Hold on. If you said we're not gonna be meeting next week?
No,
That's
there's
what
no
this
class
was?
next week.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah. So there's no class next week. And if you look on your calendar invite for the class, it doesn't have any classes for next week scheduled. But yes, good check. No class. And then the second assignment here is to write Python code that prints 3 strings in alphabetical order using if statements. So, and then you can have some extra exercises as well. So I can stay on for just a bit for questions, but if you don't have questions, and I hope you have an amazing next week, and I will see you the week after when we come back. So have a great break from class, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
I can't believe Miranda is starving us of class sessions.
I know.
This is horrible, unacceptable.
You guys will have to go a whole week without learning more Python knowledge.
Curses. Curse you.
I know. Of course, there's nothing stopping y'all from, like, I don't know, talking about Python in Discord.